The alchemical perspective sees all of creation as interconnected, with each level of existence, mineral, plant, animal, and human, linked through universal principles of development. The famous quest to transmute base metals into gold was never about material wealth. Since everything that grows comes from a seed, the fruit must be contained in its seed. Mark this well, for here lies the secret of creation. The raising of specimen is the raising of vibrations. Herbs, animals, as well as minerals and metals grow from seed. To understand this secret of nature constitutes the main theoretical subject in alchemy. If we can help nature in her ultimate goal, that of bringing her products to perfection, then we are in harmony with her laws. What is then alchemy? Stripped away from cryptic symbolism and mystical trappings. It is the science of transformation. It is the science of life, a path to personal evolution, embodying the unity of material and spiritual realms. So, dear seeker, we invite you to step into the real age of alchemy. Our aim is to reveal the truth of alchemy in contemporary language, while still remaining in harmony with ancient rules and rituals, according to the alchemist's oath. For it takes more than mere study. An honest heart, a clean heart, a true heart accomplishes more than all the book learning can ever do. We are Irrevelato, your new philosophical home. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been watching our videos for a while, thank you. If you feel like supporting us, please see our links in the description below. Remember, all our videos are meant to enlighten you. Nature does not resent an artificial effort or a shortcut to bring about perfection. To illustrate, the seed of a tomato may be put into the ground late in fall. Snow and ice may cover it during winter, but no tomato plant will grow during this time outdoors in freezing temperatures. However, if the same seed is planted inside, where sufficient warmth and moisture is provided, and if it is placed in the proper matrix, it will grow into a plant and bear fruit. This is not contrary to nature. It is in harmony with natural laws. The life force is a separate essence which fills the universe. It is the fifth of the four: fire, water, air, and earth. And it is the most important one for the alchemist to find, and then to separate. After such a separation has taken place, the answer to what lies behind the secret of creation will then manifest itself partly in the form of a dense, smoke-like vapor that settles, after passing through the condenser tube, into a water-like substance of a yellowish color, carrying with itself something oily, which gives the tinge to the extracted water. This oily substance, or alchemical sulfur, is just as essential to alchemical preparations as salt and essence. Everything in the laboratory revolves around the fire or its emanation, heat. The rest is composed of a few flasks, a condenser, and some ingenuity. It sounds rather simple, and really is so. What about all the other instruments that clutter up an alchemist's laboratory, as pictures would have us believe? Just as an artist needs only canvas, paint, and brushes to paint a picture, but may add an indefinite number of other related objects to his studio, so may an alchemist add other related equipment as he sees fit. No doubt he's going to experiment and probe deeper into the mysteries to unlock one after another. Once the soul hungers and thirsts for truth and the unfoldment of nature's laws, there is no end to its search until the ultimate has been reached. Think and live cleanly and charitably, and dwell always in truth, that which you honestly consider and believe to be the truth. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. The alchemists did not believe that they were in control of the operations. They were responsible for maintaining a proper fire, which stimulated the substances into their own natural and organic transformation. The processes they sought to engender were autonomous and took place in the material they had chosen as their prima materia. Having once selected the appropriate prima materia, an alchemist placed it in a vessel and sealed it hermetically. The next important requirement was the application of the right amount of external heat through the fire they used. The use of fire was a sensitive issue, since the external heat had to be precisely the correct temperature to initiate the inner processes. Too much heat would ruin the work, while too little would not promote the necessary processes. Once begun, the alchemical processes followed one another in the correct sequence, without any intervention on the part of the alchemist. Much of the alchemist's time was spent patiently waiting for signs indicating the process was unfolding as it should. Patient waiting is often necessary for imaginal processes as well. Of course, an individual's desire for transformation and the experience of the self is necessary too. That desire, coupled with attention and effort, provides the external heat necessary for change to take place. Beyond these factors, however, there is no way for an individual to control or make a process unfold. One cannot will the self to manifest. Working in the imaginal realm requires a willingness to follow, avoiding the temptation to control the processes. One must simply trust that the self knows what it needs to manifest. Jung's encounter with alchemy deeply influenced his understanding of the unconscious psyche. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he describes the moment of revelation. I had to acknowledge that the unconscious had spontaneously produced the same images, the same sequences and interpretations that I had found in the books of the alchemists. The experiences of the alchemists were, in a sense, my experiences, and their world was my world. The alchemists' prima materia corresponded precisely to the shadow aspects of the psyche. The dark initial state is a projection of the unconscious, characterized by the quality of affects, which are always dark and threatening so long as they are unconscious. The prima materia is saturnine, depressive, melancholic, poisonous. This raw material manifests in dreams and visions as what Jung termed night sea journeys, descents into the chaotic depths of the unconscious. The sea is the favorite symbol for the unconscious, the mother of all that lives. The black waters of the beginning are a typical representation of the unconscious in its initial undifferentiated state. The calcinatio, burning, represents the intense confrontation with instinctual drives. The fire that transforms the lead of the psyche into gold is the heat of the libido, the energetic intensity of the psychic process. The solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate operation, particularly fascinated Jung. The solution corresponds psychologically to the regression of conscious contents into the unconscious, while coagulation represents their return in altered form. This circulation process is the circumambulatio, the psychological equivalent of the philosopher's stone. Coagulatio, solidification, symbolize the process of making unconscious content conscious, giving form to formless psychic material. This process often appears in dreams as crystallization, birth, or the emergence of solid forms from chaos. The alchemist's meditation on the materia was a form of active imagination with chemical substances, leading to psychological insights that were then projected back onto matter. This understanding led Jung to develop his technique of active imagination as equivalent to alchemical operations. Performing an operation on the physical level will have an impact on the spiritual level. One cannot remain in visionary states all the time, and it is essential that the individual give physical expression to such experiences, to translate the power from the inner world into a new way of life in the outer world. So, what better starting point for studying alchemy than imagination? The modern mind, conditioned by post-Enlightenment rationalism, often dismisses imagination as mere fantasy, yet this view neglects its fundamental role in psychological development and creative manifestation. Jung's contribution on active imagination opened new areas of study, including the identification of inner figures and exploration of the imaginal world. While not every alchemist accepted the concept of imagination, a significant theory of the imaginal emerges in several alchemists' writings. Contemporary culture rarely differentiates between fantasy and imagination. Both are dismissed as unreal, and labeling something as imaginary essentially invalidates it. For alchemists, magicians, Sufi mystics, and Jung, imagination was anything but unreal. They viewed imaginary events as occurring in a world distinct from but equally valid as ordinary reality. Imagination was understood to have genuine effects on both psyche and physical reality, while facilitating direct experiences of the divine. Jacob Boehme, though not a practicing alchemist, was among those warning against fantasy's delusions. A Lutheran mystic born in 1575, Boehme employed alchemical terminology and symbols to express his mystical visions. Living through Germany's devastating religious warfare, he emphasized the struggle for redemption and the necessity of experiencing higher inner truths. Imagination was central to his mystical system, serving both as a means for soul redemption and God's method of world creation. Divine wisdom, or Sophia, represented God's creative power and manifested as divine imagination. Boehme's theory of imagination formed part of an intricate mystical theology. He clearly distinguished between good and bad imagination. Bad imagination, fantasia, caused Lucifer's fall and created illusions and false desires, leading humans away from God. By choosing fantasy over true imagination, the soul became lost in illusion and separated from divine presence. True imagination, conversely, embodied divine wisdom in the soul, leading to redemption and divine union. Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, known as Paracelsus, preceded Boehme by about 80 years. Among alchemy's most influential figures, he established salt's equivalent value with sulfur and mercury. Primarily a physician, Paracelsus viewed alchemy as a powerful tool against disease. Less interested in creating the philosopher's stone or transmuting metals, he focused on producing healing elixirs and balsams. Though an irascible, arrogant man who made enemies more readily than friends, his work offers great value, particularly his influential treatment of imagination. Like Boehme, whom he influenced, Paracelsus believed in imagination's power while warning of fantasy's dangers. Boehme and Paracelsus clearly differentiated fantasy from imagination, attributing imagination to spirit and viewing it as a spiritual function, while fantasy belonged to the physical world divorced from deeper truths. Fantasy created illusion and folly. Imagination generated liberation and healing power. Alchemists believed their work must follow nature's ways to succeed, viewing nature as both teacher and repository of latent powers. According to Paracelsus, imagination was the primary means of discovering nature's secrets and unleashing her latent powers. While fantasy perceived only obvious physical reality, imagination reached beneath the surface to nature's mysteries, revealing that the physical world required spirit for full understanding. Anyone exploring the inner world through active imagination inevitably confronts the challenge of distinguishing fantasy and delusion, especially when teaching or conducting therapy and analysis. While imagination opens doors to profound self-experience and enables self-formation, fantasy leads to inflation, illusion, and stagnation. Though differentiation proves challenging in oneself or others, Paracelsus and Boehme offer valuable guidelines. Boehme identified imagination with Sophia, God's wisdom and a feminine power crucial to alchemy. Dr. von Franz explored Sophia's nature in her analysis of Aurora Consurgens, an early 13th century alchemical text. She concluded that Sophia symbolized a transpersonal power providing the prime impulse toward all being and all knowing in their endlessly diverse forms. Von Franz interpreted this psychologically to mean that there exists in nature and in the collective unconscious, at least potentially, a kind of objective consciousness or mind from which the individual ego consciousness is derived only secondarily and through which it is expanded by illumination. Sophia indicated an inner mind, wisdom belonging not to ego but to the unconscious, though occasionally illuminating the ego. Following Boehme's formulation, this inner mind is imagination. Imagination functions spiritually, belonging to any spiritual agency. Archetypes manifest through images, explaining von Franz's attribution of wisdom to the collective unconscious. Though this inner knowing resides in the collective unconscious, it finds purest expression in the self. Consider someone whose self expresses a need for musical expression. In active imagination, ego encounters an inner musician figure urging musical personality development. Initial resistance, citing lack of time and talent, meets the figure's counter that mastery matters less than effort. Eventually, realizing music concerns heartfelt expression and enjoyment rather than skill, the person begins piano lessons and daily practice. This exemplifies imagination, as the inner figure delivers a distinct message from the inner world, which ego encounters with integrity. Disparaged as a science of making gold, in an epoch where sorcery haunted the world in reaction to dogmatic religion, alchemy is in truth the science of life. The fact that life also produces gold in nature is evident, but this is secondary to a science that is essentially mystical, and which cultivates a gnosis that reveals the secrets of attraction as equally in gravitation as in the love of a man for a woman. Jacques Lacan identified humanity's core dilemma as the confusion of object desire with the deeper desire for transcendence. Where ancient cultures maintained clear channels for transmuting erotic energy into spiritual development, contemporary culture offers consumption as the primary outlet for transformative longing. A thing is always triple in its nature. It exists in and of itself by virtue of its appearance, but it is also caused by a complementation of two states of the same nature. You yourself, by being in principle a man, human, result from the complementation of two states of the same nature. That which affirms and that which denies, that which gives and that which receives, that which expresses and that which receives the impression. This double state is your primordial spiritual androgyny. And you have recollection of this duality in unity. Desire is a string stretched between two complements, and the sound of this string is life. To produce a sound, you need a shock to make it vibrate, and this shock is eroticism. Complements are always two extreme aspects of one and the same thing, sensation or emotion. The shock results from a disequilibrium in this state of tension, which expresses itself above all by an emotive, nervous or physical tension, or by mental suspense. The disequilibrium literally produces an oscillation between the two complements, a movement that results in the exaltation of life, and the effect of this is originally expressed by sexual arousal. This desire is the force of gravitation for stars, the genesis of metals and minerals for the earth, wind and storm for the air, fecundation for plants, fornication for animals and for humankind, love. There are many forms and many visions of desire, but desire in and of itself is always identical. It is the archangel of life, and therefore also the archangel of death. All terrestrial bodies are partial realizations of this primordial or absolute body. The process of evolution through the kingdoms of nature mirrors the process of the desire for infinity. The bodies generated through the evolution of life are in a sense akin to the substitutes that we use to assuage the desire for infinity. They are vehicles but not destinations, approximate but never ultimate. Within this framework, the aim of embodied life is to intensify consciousness through excess, to make it more integral and thus liberated from duality. As a result, the physical instrument will become more integrally constellated. This is the goal toward which all becoming appears to be moving, but which paradoxically always existed as its origin. Each stage of the spiritual or allegorical alchemical journey, understood as the great work, was divided into a number of proto-scientific rituals that involve mixing volatile minerals, gases and liquids together in a primitive laboratory setting. A recipe would typically put various elements, water, fire, earth, air, and specific metals or minerals through a series of circulations in order to purify both the less pure substances and the soul of the person thus engaged. At times, Eliade notes, it seemed as though some of the metals died only to be reborn later in another form. Scholars of alchemy have noted 3 or 4 primary stages to the psycho-spiritual progression of their work. The process begins with the prima materia, an ambivalent primal substance containing the potentiality of both the elixir of immortality, physical and mental healing, and the stone of penultimate alchemical spiritual transformation. The nigredo stage represented an undifferentiated soul or substance state, a state of conflict, of moral confusion and psychic distress. It was also associated with the planet Saturn, the melancholy humor and the heavy metal lead. In some cases, even the prima materia was symbolized in terms of lead. The raven also figures prominently during the nigredo, as do images of melancholy vapors. The albedo stage represented a state of limited union of opposites, male, female, soul, body. Above, below, Mercury, sulfur. The appearance of a purified white queen, often associated more scientifically in the flask with the appearance of salt, often symbolize this stage of the work. The albedo stage has sometimes been associated with the Catholic figure of Mary, Mother of Christ. The purification of the vices and soul conflicts, indicative of the undifferentiated nigredo or saturnine stage, is progressing well, but there is more work to be done. The rubedo stage represented the ultimate conjunction of opposites and preceded the appearance of the perfected human being. A product of this stage was an epiphany concerning the philosopher's stone, which could turn lead, the nigredo soul states, into gold, happiness and joy. Hardened materialists, medieval or modern, are inclined to imagine gold in the most literal sense, and to them, wealth may symbolize the only true path to happiness. To Jung, this stage corresponded with the emergence of what he termed the self-archetype, the ultimate goal of his analytic psychology. Unconscious complexes have been made conscious, and the feminine anima aspect in a man, symbolic of the unconscious, is in balance with the more conscious masculine elements. Prima materia. One needs this to begin the great work. It had many forms, but was chiefly a symbolic entity associated with the daemon Mercury, personified as Mercurius, the earth spirit. The prime matter also had links to Orphic, Neoplatonic, Gnostic, and Hermetic creation myths. It had both male and female components. Sulfur was seen as feminine, the queen Luna, whereas Mercury was seen as male, the king Rex. To Jung, the prima materia symbolizes an undifferentiated state of being, a state of unconsciousness, and thus it represents that which we possess at the beginning of the transformative process, the impurities we've inherited from our upbringing and socialization. The self is yet to manifest. Projection of psychic content is unconscious and instinctive, and thus in some people, hidden complexes control subjectivity. The self is fraught with divisions, but the psyche, like the prima materia, possesses within itself the means for overcoming these divisions in the alchemical formulation, through commitment to the work of substance purification. The stone that is no stone. To the alchemists, the philosopher's stone could be used to transmute base metals into more perfect metals, mercury into silver, lead into gold, and so on. In the alchemical literature, we come across an almost infinite number of names for the stone. In spiritual or mystical alchemy, the stone is simply the completion of the great work. We note that some traditional alchemists also speak of a plant stone. Apparently, plant stones were most often associated with medical elixirs. From a traditional magical perspective, a stone, created by an alchemist, whether plant or mineral in form, contained the concentrated and potent magico-spiritual energy of the alchemist who had created it. Something of his or her spiritual manner was understood to have been transferred to such a stone during its creation, perhaps due to the close proximity of the alchemist throughout the operation. To Jung, the legendary attributes associated with the philosopher's stone were indicative of its psycho-spiritual links to the process of individuation, the reconciliation of the many conflict-laden dualisms in the psyche. Aqua vitae and mercury. This fluid, often associated with quicksilver, could be extracted from the prime matter. It was called the fire which doesn't burn. It was understood to be a magical water, specifically the aqua vitae, but a water which doesn't wet the hands. Throughout the alchemical texts, the aqua vitae was closely associated with both Mercurius as a spirit and the metal mercury, or quicksilver. As the alchemists understood it, Mercurius oversaw the entire process of alchemical transformation from beginning to end, being the essential principle of transformation. To Jung, individuals in the early stages of psychic transformation might see Mercury, as the spirit Mercurius, as a threatening trickster figure. This arises from their natural fear of complete psychic dissolution into insanity. The alchemist gradually applies Mercury to the wall that separates the two realms of the psyche, the ego associated with consciousness and the unconsciousness, which to Jung had both personal and collective dimensions. Amberlane, 1960, describes the aqua vitae as follows: the universal spirit enclosed in the heart of metallic darkness, spark of life enclosed in all that is in its natural, primitive state. The Hermetic egg is a vessel in which alchemical transmutations took place. The flasks and vials the alchemists used were often described by them in terms of feminine procreative symbolism. The various stages of the work represented a kind conception, pregnancy, and birth sequence. The Hermetic egg thus became a kind of artificial womb for personal transformation. In its various dramatic transformations of matter took place leading, after much hard labor, to the penultimate birth of the integrated hermaphrodite and rebis figures as the culmination of the work. The ancient alchemical system established correspondences between celestial bodies and terrestrial metals. According to the 16th century alchemist Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa in De Occulta Philosophia, these associations represented energetic connections. Gold was linked to the sun through its perceived perfection and radiance, silver to the moon through its luminous quality and mutability, mercury to quicksilver through its fluid nature, Venus to copper due to its reddish luster, Mars to iron through its hardness and martial qualities, Jupiter to tin for its temperance, and Saturn with lead because of its density and darkness. As noted by chemist Lawrence Principe in The Secrets of Alchemy, the periodic table's arrangement of metals shows surprising alignments with traditional alchemical groupings, particularly in terms of electron shell configurations and chemical reactivity patterns. The 15th century manuscript Aurora Consurgens describes specific procedures aligned with lunar phases. The whitening of the stone must commence when Luna is full, for her influences are most potent when her face is completely illuminated by Sol's rays. These timing prescriptions often coincided with optimal atmospheric conditions for certain chemical reactions. The symbolic language of alchemy employed precise geometric and astronomical symbols that carried multiple layers of meaning. The hexagram, or seal of Solomon, represented the union of opposing forces, fire and water, while simultaneously symbolizing the perfect alignment of celestial and terrestrial realms. The system of planetary hours governed laboratory operations with remarkable precision. Each day was divided into 24 unequal hours, with each hour ruled by a specific planet. When Saturn rules the hour, perform works of fixation. When Jupiter reigns, operations of amalgamation. When Mars dominates, separate and calcine. When Sol shines, perfect and multiply. When Venus rules, conjoin and ferment. When Mercury presides, sublime and distill. When Luna governs, dissolve and purify. Fixed stars played a crucial role in alchemical timing. The heliacal rising of Sirius was considered particularly significant, as noted in the Pythagoras. When the dog star rises with the sun, the powers of transmutation are at their height. While alchemy fundamentally teaches the transformation of base matter into spiritual gold, many practitioners became fixated on extending physical existence, a seemingly contradictory goal for those seeking spiritual enlightenment. The Taoist text Cantong Qi, Union of the Three Principles, distinguishes between external elixir, Weidan, and internal elixir, Neidan, traditions. The text suggests that true immortality comes not from consuming physical substances, but through internal spiritual transformation. Nevertheless, numerous Chinese emperors died from ingesting alchemical elixirs containing toxic minerals like mercury and cinnabar, highlighting the tragic consequences of misunderstanding alchemical metaphor as literal instruction. The concept of an immortality elixir spread along the Silk Road, reaching Islamic alchemists who termed it al-iksir, from which the English word elixir derives. Elixir of immortality served its highest purpose not through success, but through failure, teaching practitioners through direct experience that true immortality lay not in extending physical existence, but in transcending identification with temporal form altogether. The pursuit itself becomes a vehicle for psychological individuation, regardless of its literal impossibility. Greek writings tell us that they thought substances could be converted or transformed into other forms. They observed the changing of states due to heat and equated it with biological processes. For example, it was believed that an animal digested its food by cooking it in its stomach. The Greeks were philosophers and thinkers, not experimentalists, so they did not conduct experiments to verify their ideas. They believed that a sphere was perfection, so no substance on Earth was perfect. As early as the 6th century BC, Thales of Miletus proposed that water is the primal matter from which everything originated. He is also credited with defining a soul as that which possesses eternal motion. Anaximander also believed in a primary substance, the apeiron, which was eternal and unlimited in extension. It was not composed of any known elements, and it possessed eternal motion. Anaximenes modified the ideas of his predecessors and stated that air is the primary substance, and suggested it could be transformed into other substances by thinning, fire, or thickening. Wind, clouds, rain, hail, earth, rock. Heraclitus of Ephesus said that fire is the primeval substance and that change is the only reality. The Pythagoreans, Pythagoras attempted to reduce the theory of matter to a mathematical and geometric basis by using geometric solids to represent the basic elements. Cube is earth, tetrahedron is fire, octahedron is air, icosahedron is water, and dodecahedron represents the ether. Empedocles of Agrigentum is credited with the first announcement of the concept of 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, which were capable of combining to form all other substances. The way in which the elements combined was due to specific attractions or repulsions, which were typified as love and hate. This 4-element theory dominated science for approximately 2,000 years. Anaxagoras of Clazomenae considered the universe to be composed of an infinite variety of small particles called seeds. These seeds were infinitely divisible and possessed a quality which allowed like to attract like to form substances such as flesh, bone, gold, etc. Leucippus and Democritus set forth the first atomic theory. They believed that all material things were consisted of small, indivisible particles, or atoms, which were all qualitatively alike, differing only in size, shape, position, and mass. These atoms, they stated, exist in a vacuous space which separates them, and because of this space, they are capable of movement. This can be considered as the first kinetic theory. Plato adopted the 4-element theory, earth, air, fire, and water, and hinted at a 5th element, an ether, which eventually became associated with the heavens. Using the ideas of the Pythagoreans, Plato associated the 4 elements with 4 regular solids. Fire composed of tetrahedral atoms, earth composed of cubic atoms, water, icosahedral atoms, 20 faces, and air octahedral atoms. The heavenly element, or ether, was represented by the dodecahedron. This was the foundation of the universe with a shape closely approximating a sphere. Plato believed in transformations of substances. He said the sides of the 4 regular solids could be resolved into triangles, which could be interconnected to form any substance. Aristotle discounted the geometric forms of the elements used by his teacher Plato, but he retained the 5th element, the ether, which he believed formed the heavenly bodies and filled space. Aristotle attributed matter with 4 qualities, hot, cold, wet, and dry, which combined in making up matter. These qualities were probably symbolic of the properties of matter, rather than the fundamental building blocks as was later thought. The 4 qualities can form 6 possible pairs, but since opposites cannot be coupled together, as hot with cold or as wet and dry, there remained only 4 pairs. Hot and dry equal fire, hot and wet. Give air, cold and wet equal water, cold and dry equal earth. The qualities were blended in various amounts and were not perceptible when the atoms were combined to form substances. Aristotle's death marked the end of the Greek influence upon the development of the theories concerning the nature of matter and its changes. Aristotle's student, Alexander, went on to conquer much of the known world. Alexander located his city, Alexandria, in the middle of the known world, in Egypt. Here he established a great library collecting writings from the world. All visitors to the city were required to surrender all books, scrolls, and any form of written media, in any language. in their possession which were copied by official scribes and then returned to their owner. The Chinese alchemical tradition developed along two complementary paths: Weiden, external alchemy, and Neiden, internal alchemy. These approaches, while distinct in their methods, shared the fundamental goal of achieving immortality and spiritual transcendence. Weiden practitioners focused on the manipulation of physical substances, particularly minerals and metals, in their quest for the elixir of immortality. These external alchemists worked extensively with cinnabar, mercuric sulfide, and realgar, arsenic sulfide, believing that these substances, when properly purified and prepared, could confer physical immortality. Their work laid the groundwork for early Chinese chemistry and metallurgy, though their pursuits often proved dangerous or fatal due to the toxic nature of their materials. Neiden, by contrast, developed as an internal practice of spiritual refinement. These practitioners turned their attention inward, viewing the human body as a laboratory for spiritual transformation. Through sophisticated systems of meditation, breathing exercises, and visualization techniques, they sought to cultivate the golden elixir within themselves. This internal elixir represented the ultimate achievement of spiritual cultivation, marking the practitioner's transformation into an immortal being. The principle of yin-yang duality informed all alchemical operations, with practitioners seeking to understand and manipulate the interplay of these opposing yet complementary forces. The Taoist concept of wu-wei, which means non-action, influenced alchemical practice by emphasizing the importance of working in harmony with natural processes rather than forcing transformations. Chinese alchemy included the three treasures of Jing, essence, qi, vital force, and Shen, spirit. These concepts represented different levels of material and spiritual refinement, with practitioners seeking to transform Jing into qi and qi into Shen through their practices. The five elements theory describes the relationships between wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, and their roles in both material and spiritual transformation. Buddhist thought, particularly from the Vajrayana traditions, added another dimension to Eastern alchemy. The Vajrayana tradition viewed the human body as a microcosm of the universe, capable of being transformed through specific practices into an adamantine vehicle of enlightenment. The concept of transformation in Buddhist alchemy operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Physical substances served as metaphors for mental states, while laboratory processes mirrored meditation practices. This parallelism is particularly evident in the Tibetan tradition of Rasayana, where mercury purification was seen as analogous to the purification of consciousness. Buddhist monasteries became important centers for alchemical experimentation. Chinese Buddhist alchemists integrated Indian Rasayana practices with indigenous Chinese theories about immortality and transformation. The Buddhist emphasis on impermanence, anicca, and emptiness, sunyata, influenced how Chinese alchemists understood material transformation. Rather than seeking literal immortality, many Buddhist-influenced alchemists viewed their work as a means of understanding laws of reality. With the rise of the Arab Empire, 8th to 11th centuries AD, the Alexandrian Greek alchemy was revived. The alchemical arts now included numerology and astrology, along with many of the mystical ideas from the Alexandrians. The Islamic Golden Age transformed alchemy from a mystical art into a proto-science, establishing fundamental principles that would later form the bedrock of modern chemistry. In the early period of systematization during the 8th and 9th centuries, Jabir ibn Hayyan emerged as a towering figure whose influence would extend far beyond the Islamic world. Known in Latin texts as Geber, he revolutionized alchemical practice by introducing rigorous experimental methods and systematic classification of substances. Perhaps his most profound contribution was the development of al-mizan, the science of balance, which proposed that all material transformations could be understood through precise mathematical ratios. This concept would later influence the development of quantitative chemistry. The empirical tradition was further developed by Al-Razi in the 9th and 10th centuries. Known as Rhazes in the West, he brought unprecedented observational rigor to alchemy. His masterwork, The Book of Secrets, detailed experimental procedures with such precision that many can be replicated in modern laboratories. Al-Razi's innovation of the alembic, a distillation apparatus, revolutionized both alchemy and medicine. His systematic approach to classifying substances based on their chemical properties laid the groundwork for modern chemical classification systems. Ibn Sina's work, The Book of Remedy, represented a synthesis of medical and chemical knowledge that would influence practitioners for centuries to come. Islamic alchemists developed the al-athanor, a self-feeding furnace capable of maintaining constant temperatures, a crucial innovation for controlled chemical reactions. Their understanding of distillation, crystallization, and purification processes was unmatched in the medieval world. These techniques were applied not only to theoretical research, but also to practical arts such as perfume making, metallurgy, and the production of medicines. The concept of takwin, or artificial generation, proposed that natural processes could be understood and accelerated through human intervention. The theory of ruh, spirit, proposed that every substance possessed an essential nature that could be extracted, purified, and transformed. The transmission of this rich body of knowledge to Europe primarily occurred through Spain and Sicily, where Arabic texts were translated into Latin beginning in the 12th century. The impact was profound. European alchemists gained not only practical knowledge, but also a sophisticated theoretical framework for understanding material transformation. The works of Jabir ibn Hayyan, particularly his Book of 70, became foundational texts in European alchemy and early chemistry. Jabir was a physician in Baghdad and is thought to have been the first writer in Arabic to become interested in alchemy. Approximately 500 works have been attributed to him. Jabir's writings reflect his beliefs in mystical powers, influence of the stars, the potency of talismans, etc. In spite of his leanings toward mysticism, he more clearly recognized the importance of experiment than any other early chemist, and he made noteworthy advances in both theory and practice of chemistry. He stated, "The first essential in chemistry is that thou shouldest perform practical work and conduct experiments, for he who performs not practical work nor makes experiments will never attain to the least degree of mastery. But thou, O my son, do thou experiment, so that thou mayest acquire knowledge. Scientists delight not in abundance of material, they rejoice only in the excellence of their experimental methods." Hermetic teachings encompass metaphysical principles about the nature of reality, consciousness, and divine order, while alchemy represents the practical methodology for implementing these principles through material operations. Hermes Trismegistus is a figure associated with the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek Hermes, embodying divine wisdom and knowledge. Ancient Egyptian priests attributed to him the authorship of approximately 42 sacred texts, covering subjects from cosmology to ritual practices. The epithet thrice greatest reflected mastery over three domains: the physical world, the philosophical realm, and the divine mysteries. The Corpus Hermeticum, compiled in Hellenistic Egypt between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE, presented systematic teachings on the nature of divinity, cosmos, and human transformation. These texts, rediscovered and translated by Marsilio Ficino in 1463 under Cosimo de' Medici's patronage, profoundly influenced Renaissance alchemical thought. The Hermetic writings presented a unified worldview where material and spiritual transformations were intrinsically connected. Zosimos of Panopolis, writing in 3rd century CE Alexandria, integrated Hermetic principles into practical laboratory work. His texts describe visions and allegorical experiences while conducting alchemical operations, demonstrating the integration of spiritual and material aspects of the great work. His writings reveal how Hermetic philosophy informed the interpretation of chemical processes as spiritual allegories. Hermetic wisdom's emphasis on the unity of matter and spirit, the correspondence between cosmic and terrestrial processes, and the possibility of material and spiritual transformation continues to influence understanding of human potential and natural processes. The tradition's integration of practical knowledge with philosophical principles created a comprehensive approach to understanding nature and human development. One of the works which appeared in this period was the Emerald Table, ascribed to Hermes Trismegistus, the Egyptian god Thoth, god of science and mathematics. He has been regarded as the father of alchemy. His name has supplied a synonym for the art, the Hermetic art. And even today we speak of hermetically sealing flasks and the like. But who Hermes actually was, or even if there were such a personage, is a matter of conjecture. The alchemists themselves supposed him to have been an Egyptian living about the time of Moses. He is now generally regarded as purely mythical, a personification of Thoth, the Egyptian god of learning. But of course, some person or persons must have written the works attributed to him, and the first of such writers, if, as seems not unlikely, there were more than one, may be considered to have a right to the name. Of these works, the Divine Pymander, a mystical religious treatise, is the most important. The Golden Tevractate, also attributed to Hermes, which is an exceedingly obscure alchemistic work, is now regarded as having been written at a comparatively late date. In a work attributed to Albertus Magnus, but which is probably spurious, we are told that Alexander the Great found the tomb of Hermes in a cave near Hebron. This tomb contained an emerald table, the Smaragdine table, on which were inscribed the following 13 sentences in Phoenician characters. Here the most interesting. What is below is like that which is above, and what is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of one thing. And as all things were produced by the mediation of one being, so all things were produced from this one thing by adaptation. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, acting prudently and with judgment. Ascend with the greatest sagacity from the earth to heaven, and then again descend to the earth, and unite together the powers of things superior and things inferior. Thus you will obtain the glory of the whole world, and all obscurity will fly far away from you. Until the 12th century, almost the sole contact between Islam and Christian Europe was through the Crusades. Soon, after 1100, European scholars began to discover that the Saracens were possessed of much knowledge and wisdom, and many began to wander in Muslim lands in search of learning and enlightenment. Sicily, an appendage of Islam, was captured by the Normans in 1091 and thus became a center of diffusion of Arabic learning. It was in Spain, however, still under Moorish control, that the greatest activity prevailed. Students were welcomed to the colleges and libraries at Toledo, Barcelona, Segovia, Pamplona, and other Spanish towns. Study was followed by translation. One of the earliest of the translators was the Englishman Robert of Chester. In 1141, he and his friend Herman the Dalmatian were persuaded to translate the Quran into Latin, a task they completed in 1143. Upon completion of that work, Robert translated the Arabic alchemical book, the Book of the Composition of Alchemy, completing it on February 11th, 1144. This was the first book on alchemy to appear in Latin Europe. Alchemy, as Robert of Chester observed, was a new science for the West, and one of the difficulties of the translators was that there were no Latin equivalents of many of its technical terms. They chose the easiest way of surmounting this obstacle by simply transliteration of the Arabic words into Roman letters. The first results of the abundant influx of knowledge from Islam were to be seen in the sorting out of new material and its arrangement for general use. This was done by several compilers or encyclopedists. Bartholomew the Englishman, a Franciscan monk, wrote his Encyclopedia De Proprietatibus Rerum on the nature of things, or on the properties of things, sometime before 1260, probably between 1242 and 1247. The work, in 19 books, covered all the sciences as known at that time, including theology, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, chronology, zoology, botany, geography, and mineralogy. The work was to serve as instruction for his fellow Franciscans, who were expected to be educated, but didn't have the time or means to study each discipline individually. He quoted extensively from a wide variety of authors, referring to the works of Greek, Arabian, and Jewish naturalists and medical writers, which had been translated into Latin shortly before. He cites such authorities as Aristotle, Hippocrates, Pliny, Augustine, Boethius, Rabanus Maurus, Solinus, and Isidore of Seville, among many others. The De Proprietatibus Rerum was an immediate success and continued to be popular for centuries. It was translated into several languages, including Spanish, French, Dutch, and English. Albertus Magnus, a Dominican friar and priest, achieved fame for his comprehensive knowledge of and advocacy for the peaceful coexistence of science and religion. He is considered to be the greatest German philosopher and theologian of the Middle Ages. He was the first among medieval scholars to apply Aristotle's philosophy to Christian thought. His book, De Rebus Metallicis et Mineralibus, presented a knowledge of metals and minerals, and his beliefs that stones had occult properties. Two later works, such as the Secreta Alberti or the Experimenta Alberti, were falsely attributed to Albertus by their authors in order to increase their prestige. There is scant evidence that he personally performed alchemical experiments, but according to legend, Albertus Magnus is said to have discovered the philosopher's stone and passed it to his pupil, Thomas Aquinas, shortly before his death. Magnus did record that he witnessed the creation of gold by transmutation. Arnold of Villanova was an alchemist, astrologer, and physician who studied chemistry, medicine, physics, and Arabic philosophy. His major work was the Opera Omnia. His translations and commentaries on the works of Galen, Avicenna, A.I. Kindi, and Hippocrates helped lift European medical practice out of the realm of folk art and connect it with classical Greek and Arabic medicine. Although he is said to have practiced alchemy and is rumored to have discovered carbon monoxide and pure alcohol, his works are directed mostly to medicine, and chemistry was dealt with only incidentally. With the exception of Arnold of Villanova, who performed alchemical experiments, the encyclopedists contributed little of their own. Nearly all the information from the Greeks and Arabs they received was accepted as true, and the authenticity of some fantastic stories was not questioned. The encyclopedists aroused interest in science through systematic propaganda of education and by their enthusiasm. Their main result on chemistry was to initiate a mad rush to make gold, an endeavor that persisted for 3 centuries. The European alchemists no longer followed the sequence of the Arabic alchemists with their main goal to produce gold as their final product. Practical alchemy developed first with textbooks attributed to Jabir under the Latin name of Geber. These Latin works were too clear and systematic in style and contained information that was inconsistent with that of Jabir's time. It is believed that much of these were written by a European scholar, most probably an unnamed Spanish alchemist of the 14th century. Regardless, Geber's works became the principal authorities in Western alchemy for the next 2 to 3 centuries. Since the rebirth of alchemy produced many charlatans who were trying to get rich quick by strange schemes and by circulating large amounts of counterfeit gold, Pope John XIII issued a decree in 1317 prohibiting the practice of alchemy. In an attempt to persuade the Pope to change his mind, John Dastin, a foremost English alchemist of the time, wrote letters to the Pope defending the practice of alchemy. The results of Dastin's efforts are not known, however. Both clerical and civil authorities tried to suppress the alchemists continually through the 14th century. As a result, the alchemical writings of the mid-14th to late 15th century became more philosophical and mystical in nature. During this time, very little new alchemical information was published. The transformation from practical metallurgy to proto-chemistry occurred in Alexandria between 300 BCE and 100 CE. Alexandrian craftsman philosophers developed systematic approaches to material transformation, moving beyond simple metalworking to explore the fundamental nature of matter and its potential for change. They began classifying substances based on observable properties and behaviors under heat, creating the first documented laboratory procedures. A crucial development emerged with the invention of the Kierkegaard device in Alexandria around 200 CE. This sealed glass vessel enabled controlled vapor condensation, marking a significant advance in chemical apparatus design. Mary the Jewess, working in Alexandria during this period, contributed further to this technical evolution by inventing the double boiler, known today as the bain-marie, and describing early reflux condensation techniques that would influence chemical practices for centuries to come. Zosimos of Panopolis, working around 300 CE, documented an impressive array of laboratory apparatus. His writings describe sophisticated distillation equipment, sealed vessels for containing volatile substances, and carefully designed furnaces with temperature control mechanisms. These innovations demonstrated a clear understanding of the need for precise control over chemical processes. The theoretical framework came from Aristotle's natural philosophy of the four elements. Each element existed not as a simple substance, but as a combination of fundamental qualities. Fire embodied hot and dry qualities. Air contained hot and moist properties. Water held cold and moist characteristics, and earth manifested cold and dry attributes. This provided alchemists with a conceptual framework for understanding material transformations. By the 8th century CE, Jabir ibn Hayyan revolutionized alchemical theory by developing the three principles approach. His work proposed that all substances contained varying proportions of sulfur, mercury, and salt principles, representing combustibility, metallic properties, and solidity respectively. This theoretical framework proved more practical for laboratory work than the earlier four-element theory. Al-Razi, working in the late 9th century, established the first systematic classification of substances based on empirical properties rather than philosophical principles. His laboratory work demonstrated a shift toward what we would now recognize as scientific methodology, emphasizing careful observation and reproducible results over theoretical speculation. Chemistry, as distinct from alchemy and latrochemistry, commenced with Robert Boyle, who first clearly recognized the birth of that, its ames, neither the transmutation of modern chemistry, the metals nor the preparation of medicines, but the observation and generalization of a certain class of phenomena, who denied the validity of the alchemistic view of the constitution of matter and enunciated the definition of an element which has since reigned supreme in chemistry, and who enriched the science with observations of the utmost importance. Boyle, however, was a man whose ideas were in advance of his times, and intervening between the iatrochemical period and the age of modern chemistry proper came the period of the phlogistic theory, a theory which had a certain affinity with the ideas of the alchemists. The phlogiston theory was mainly due to Georg Ernst Stahl. Becher had attempted to revive the once universally accepted sulfur-mercury-salt theory of the alchemists in a somewhat modified form by the assumption that all substances consist of three earths, the combustible, mercurial, and vitreous, and herein is to be found the germ of Stahl's phlogistic theory. According to Stahl, all combustible bodies contain phlogiston, the principle of combustion, which escapes in the form of flame when such substances are burned. According to this theory, the metals are compounds, since they consist of a metallic calyx, what we now call the oxide of the metal, combined with phlogiston. And further, to obtain the metal from the calyx, it is only necessary to act upon it with some substance rich in phlogiston. Now, coal and charcoal are almost completely combustible, leaving very little residue. Hence, according to this theory, they must consist very largely of phlogiston. And as a matter of fact, metals can be obtained by heating their calces with either of these substances. Many other facts of such nature were explicable in terms of the phlogiston theory, and it became exceedingly popular. Chemists at this time did not pay attention to the balance. It was observed, however, that metals increased in weight on calcination, but this was explained on the assumption that phlogiston possessed negative weight. Antoine Lavoisier, utilizing Priestley's discovery of oxygen and studying the weight relations accompanying combustion, demonstrated the non-validity of the phlogistic theory and proved combustion to be the combination of the substance burnt with a certain constituent of the air, the oxygen. By this time, alchemy was to all intents and purposes defunct. Boerhaave was the last eminent chemist to give any support to its doctrines, and the new chemistry of Lavoisier gave it a final death blow. Paracelsus was the first to recognize the desirability of investigating the physical universe with a motive other than alchemistic. He taught that the object of chemistry is not to make gold, but to prepare medicines, and founded the school of iatrochemistry or medical chemistry. This synthesis of chemistry with medicine was a very great benefit to each science. New possibilities of chemical investigation were opened up now that the aim was not purely alchemistic. Paracelsus's central theory was that of the analogy between man, the microcosm, and the world or macrocosm. He regarded all the actions that go on in the human body as of a chemical nature, and he thought that illness was the result of a disproportion in the body between the quantities of the three great principles, sulfur, mercury, and salt, which he regarded as constituting all things. For example, he considered an excess of sulfur as the cause of fever, since sulfur was the fiery principle. The alchemist archetype functions as a pattern of psychic transformation, encoding humanity's impulse toward consciousness integration. Jung's research into alchemical manuscripts revealed this archetype operates as transformative agent and vessel of transformation. The self-creating force of psyche, manifesting through symbolic operations. Parallels between alchemical processes and individuation illuminates how this archetype orchestrates psychic development. The nigredo, blackening, corresponds to confrontation with the shadow. Albedo, whitening, reflects anima-animus integration, and rubedo, reddening, manifests as self-realization. These stages demonstrate the archetype's function in structuring psychological transformation through symbolic death and rebirth cycles. Marie-Louise von Franz expanded Jung's insights by mapping how the alchemist archetype mediates between collective and personal unconscious through active imagination. Her analysis of alchemical texts revealed this archetype's role in transforming archetypal content into individualized consciousness through opus contra naturam, work against nature's usual patterns. This process transmutes raw psychic material into differentiated awareness through controlled regression and symbolic manipulation. The Islamic alchemical tradition, particularly in Jabir ibn Hayyan's corpus, positions the archetype as consciousness capable of perceiving spirit in matter. This perspective illuminates how the alchemist represents integration of spiritual and material modes of perception. Henry Corbin's research into Islamic alchemy further revealed the archetype's function in mundus imaginalis, the imaginal realm where spirit and matter interpenetrate. This intermediary dimension provides the space where transformation of both consciousness and substance becomes possible. James Hillman's archetypal psychology reframes the alchemist as psyche's inherent capacity for soul-making through metaphorical perception. This archetypal function transforms literal understanding into symbolic consciousness by recognizing all experience as simultaneously physical and metaphorical. The alchemical vessel represents the imagination's container where multiple levels of meaning coexist and transmute each other. Contemporary depth psychologist Robert Bosnak's work with embodied imagination reveals how the alchemist archetype integrates somatic and psychic experience. This integration manifests through awareness of subtle energies, the psychophysical forces operating between matter and consciousness. The archetype thus represents the psyche's capacity to work simultaneously with tangible and intangible dimensions of experience. Mircea Eliade's anthropological research connects the alchemist archetype to humanity's primordial experience of sacred technology. Ancient metallurgists and smiths embodied this archetype through participation in matter's transformation, revealing its role in mediating between natural processes and human consciousness. This historical dimension illuminates how the archetype structures human engagement with material and spiritual evolution. Jung concept of integral consciousness provides crucial context for understanding the alchemist archetype's contemporary relevance. The archetype embodies consciousness capable of simultaneously operating in archaic, magical, mythical, and mental modes, without reduction to any single mode. This integral function proves essential for navigating current planetary challenges, requiring transformation of fundamental assumptions about consciousness and reality. The archetype's relationship to time reveals its distinctive mode of consciousness. Unlike linear scientific progression, alchemical transformation operates through cycles of solve et coagula, dissolution, and reconstitution. This circular temporality reflects how genuine transformation often requires regression and repetition, a pattern evident in both psychological development and cultural evolution. Ultimately, the individual is a unique and closed system, a unique thing which centers around an unpredictable source of life. If that becomes real in an individual, then one feels the mystery of a unique personality. That has to do with shutting the house, which means separation from collective entanglements and contamination, not only outwardly but inwardly, separating within oneself from what is ordinary and not oneself. It is important to emphasize the self-contained aspect to alchemy and psychoanalysis, which is what the sealed lead coffin of Osiris from the Hermetic traditions alludes to. Von Franz asserts that just like the allegorical story of Osiris transcending death, with the wheat grains growing from his encased body in his sarcophagus, it is often better when faced with a depression to engage in the conflict between the unconscious and conscious internally, rather than to avoid it. Frequently, if one chooses to avoid or deny the depression, there is a danger of psychosis, in which the unconscious drives can overwhelm consciousness. In alchemy, this self-contained aspect was usually represented by the hermetically sealed vessel, in which the prima materia is heated by the red sulfur. In psychoanalytical terms, this is the ego being heated by the unconscious drives of the conflict to progress the individuation of the self. Another good example of this would be the Ouroboros, or serpent devouring its own tail. One must remember the Ouroboros, the tail-eater, where the opposite are one. The head is at one end and the tail at the other. They are one but have an opposite aspect, and when the head and the tail, the opposites, meet, there a flow is born, which is what the alchemists mean by the mystical or divine water, which I described as the meaningful flux of life. With the help of the instinct of truth, life goes on as a meaningful flow, as a manifestation of the self. Alchemists were searching for the spiritual in the material, and the importance of this is, in psychoanalytical terms, is the link between the conscious and the unconscious. We do not really know the difference between material reality and the psyche. What this means is that our experience of order in the world comes through our minds. In other words, the human psyche decodes reality through its perception, and alchemical symbolism can help to adjust the sense of self when that perception becomes faulty due to the balance between conscious and unconscious becoming unstable. Through active imagination and personifying the drives of this conflict, when it appears as animus/anima archetypes, one can redress the balance and unify the opposites to bring about a whole, individuated self. Individuation and the alchemical process both initiate from a state of conscious confusion, and by no means is either an easy process. Creation comes from destruction, and symbolically, when faced with a destructive emotion or psychosis, an aspect of the psyche has to symbolically die in order for the individuated self to emerge with the ego dominating and assimilating the unconscious. Individuation is seen as the incarnation of the divine in flesh, and the individuated personality becomes akin to a son of God. All outer events in life are in a way only similes. They are only parables of an inner process, synchronistic symbolizations. You have to look at them from that angle to understand and integrate them. That would be spiritualizing the physical. You have again to solidify the spirit. You have to do both. The process needs both movements so as not to become destructive, and that is so beautifully illustrated in alchemy. The body has to be spiritualized, and the spirit has to be incarnated. Both things must take place. What unknown aspects of yourself await transformation in your own alchemical vessel?